All right, everyone. We're going to get started. I know some of you are joining from the last session, which was really fabulous and hard to leave, I know. But we have some great content here in this session and the rest of our sessions throughout the day. So thanks for joining us for the third day of Connecticut's Affordable Housing Conference. If you've been joining all along, thanks for sticking in. And I'm sure we have some folks joining us just for this particular session on the QAP, those of you who pay particular attention to that topic, perhaps your developers or folks in the finance field, and are interested in hearing from Nandini. So I'm going to get straight to our session and get through our housekeeping here. Thank you again for joining us for the conference. This session is about the Qualified Allocation Plan, implementing state housing policies. And thanks to our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, La Rosa Building Group, Melville Charitable Trust, and Wells Fargo. Also, a big thanks to our collaborating sponsors, Bank of America, Rockport Mortgage, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, Webster Bank, and Key Bank. And also a big thanks to all of our supporting sponsors you see here on the screen. Their continued investment in our work helps to make this conference free and available to everyone and helps support our work. The session sponsor for this session is appropriately Cohen Resnick, so thank you for your sponsorship. Also a note, exciting note, our Connecticut data profiles have been updated. So I wanted to share that with everybody for those of you who use these in your municipalities or whatever your job function may be. They provide useful demographic and housing information on a town-by-town basis. The interactive data platform allows you to compare and contrast towns, and that data is now updated into the 2022 version and is live on our website, pschousing.org. So wanted to let you know about that. And with that, I'm going to move off of screen sharing and remind you of some, sorry about that, remind you of some housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded and all participants have entered muted. So please remain on mute unless the speaker has asked you to unmute. If you have a technology issue, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send it to me or Kaylee Pratt, who you see on the screen, and we'll do our best to assist you. Your speakers will let you know how you would like content questions to be submitted. I think in this case, we're going to be using the chat function, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation after Nandini's remarks. Let's see. With that, I am going to jump in and introduce our main speaker of the hour, Nandini Natarajan. So it's hard to imagine that it's been, I think, almost 4 years, or is it 4 years, 3 years since Nandini started as the CEO of CHFA. And I'm proud to say that I got to be on the committee that selected her. We couldn't be more pleased, especially during the challenging times that we've been through the past couple of years. She's really brought a willingness to listen to a wide variety of partners and the flexibility to think broadly about housing in the context of Connecticut's future, while remaining steadfast in her role as a responsible steward of state and federal resources. So under her leadership, she and the amazing staff at CHFA have continued their work with the rehabilitation and construction of literally thousands of units of affordable housing here in our state. And she comes to us with lots of experience. She's the first woman appointed as the CEO of the CHFA, which is wonderful and also crazy that it took that long when she became director in November of 2019. She has more than 25 years of experience in affordable housing finance. She previously served as the CFO of the Illinois Housing Development Authority, an organization with an affordable housing mission and structure that's similar to CHFA. And she brings extensive experience as a leader and innovator in housing finance, understanding the complexities of affordable housing development and experience in capital markets. And prior to working for the Illinois Housing Development Authority, she worked as a financial advisor for Kane Mitter and Associates in New York. And she has a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics from Smith College right up the road, and a master's degree from UMass Amherst. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nandini before we start our QAP session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Kylie, for that lovely introduction. we're excited to be a part of this annual tradition now of gathering and sharing and learning from each other. I'm personally honored to share the virtual stage with so many brilliant and passionate leaders. The opening remarks yesterday by Deputy Secretary Todman, Senator Murphy, Commissioner Mosquera-Bruno, who demonstrate that it's important to have a strong, well-informed democracy because it ensures everybody has safe access to safe, quality, affordable housing. Diane Yentl's powerful remarks at the opening plenary, as well as this morning's conversations that reminded us about the power of storytelling and communicating, and how to keep collective challenges and triumphs that we're, aiming for front of mind. I'm proud of the role that we're playing in supporting the partnership, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to contribute to the conversation. I want to personally thank my colleagues who presented earlier this week. Yesterday, Andrew Bolger, Jonathan Cabral, and Kayla Giordano were all on a panel about data and about Connecticut's housing markets. And we had a really thought-provoking panel about ongoing initiatives to support wealth building and equity through homeownership, which was moderated by Lisa Hensley. And in a few minutes, we're going to hear from Terry Nash, Jennifer Landau, and Debbie Alter on the Qualified Allocation Plan. There's an old adage that goes something like, tell me who you walk with and I'll tell you who you are. I think a version of that applies to this conference, because if you take a look at all the topics and the folks that have participated, it shows you what is really important to our work in this moment. Racial equity, social justice, opportunity and advocacy, health, sustainability, all these things are lenses with which we're reframing how we think about investing for impact. I believe gone are the days of merely focusing on the transaction, whether it was making numbers work on a multifamily development or funding a first mortgage. I think these activities are essential to the work we do, and CHFA values the trust that the state places in us for administering, a broad spectrum of resources, from the tax credit, whether it's state or federal, to all of our homeownership programs. But I think we're starting to see a shift away from the transactional nature of affordable housing to something a lot more transformational. And it might sound crazy coming from someone like me, who's the head of a housing finance authority, but in some ways, financing and doing deals and underwriting mortgages, all of that's easy. The real challenge is, how do you do it with others and with purpose, with intention, with the goal of sustaining communities, of rebuilding them, of doing environmentally sustainable work, at the same time looking to make sure resources are being used wisely. And in terms of communities, like, how do you do that in a way that where the solutions we deliver help keep generations of people housed safely? And it sounds almost impossible, but there's a quote from a German sociologist called Max Weber, who said, and I think I'm paraphrasing when I say, we would not have attained the possible unless you reached for the impossible. So how do you reach for the impossible? I would argue that we're already doing that. I think our understanding of housing and how it intersects with so many parts of our life has really continued to evolve in the last year or two through the advocacy, the research, all the storytelling we're doing, and all of that has either helped confirm what we already knew or suspected, but has also helped us, pointed us in new and interesting directions. We've understand the importance of community revitalization and the impact that blight has on not only things like property values, but also on long-term health and educational outcomes for the kids who live down the block from a blighted building. and it can affect how we form partnerships to address and work towards a shared vision. We've learned about economic mobility of lower income children that can be influenced through strong social networks with higher income peers. It can shape how we design and invest in mixed income communities to support pathways to opportunity. Communities like Windward Apartments in Bridgeport or Torrington Riverfront in Torrington. It can inform how we leverage resources like Time to Own, which many of you are aware of, is a first-time homebuyer program that allows first-time homebuyers more purchasing power in an incredibly competitive housing market, which can help reduce barriers to wealth building for people who otherwise have been left behind. So we're continuing to learn about the prevalence and long-term impact that decades of discriminatory housing policies have had in our state. And generations later, we're starting to write new chapters in our history books through developments in communities like Mill River Crossing in New Haven or Armstrong Court in Greenwich. And along the way, we're getting some new concepts that are challenging how we think about investing. Entrepreneur and activist Majora Carter suggests that we approach it with the same vigor and strategic imperative that drives companies to invest in retaining talent, which is to recognize and appreciate that talented and brilliant residents are already living here, and that we have great communities, that we want to be able to showcase them and make them even more attractive and appealing, rather than just assuming that it's inevitable that people are going to leave to places that have more opportunities and resources. And I think there's a tendency to also focus on seemingly insurmountable odds against making real change. So I'm sure many of us are aware of the statistics: 44 affordable homes for every 100 low-income renters. Half of all low-income households are housing cost burdened. How, despite best efforts, we have historically low vacancy rates, high home values, which will continue to make first-time home buying extremely difficult. We've talked about exclusionary zoning and aging population and brain drain and missing middle. The list goes on, but the work that we do is often incremental, and it often doesn't show up all at one time. It can be years in the making. We have a lot to celebrate as we close out 2022. I can talk about all the units we're creating and the millions of dollars of investment we're doing, but it's really not the whole picture. There's other less tangible things. I mean, even the fact that we're having all these conversations at this conference that make this work so fulfilling, and frankly, it's what makes me excited to come to work every day, because it's more than just knowing we've financed a new apartment building with Passive House, or we've preserved the historic character of another building, or it's more than just walkability or sustainability. It's a celebration of what makes each of us unique. It's what makes our communities special. It's both for the people who live here now, but for generations to come. It's knowing that in the face of it all, when the numbers don't add up or the data seems stacked against us, we keep going. It's the belief that you really shouldn't have to sacrifice stability, quality, accessibility, or affordability to live in a home in the community of your choice. And that's why we're all here today. The shared vision, the drive to reach for that impossible, that's what we celebrate when we gather, when we share, and when we learn from each other. I'm really grateful for these moments together, and I hope you are too, because honestly, that is really what keeps us motivated and leaning in. So I want to thank you again for the partnership, for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. And I'm going to turn it back to you Kylie or turn it over to Terry, Debbie, and Jennifer at this point.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I can agree with you more about the place we're in and what this moment calls us to do and think about as it relates to housing and think more broadly. And we're really lucky in this state to have a leader like Nandini heading up CHFA who has that vision and thinks beyond the financing and is thinking about families and individuals and where we are and what they need and what our state needs. So thank you so much, Nandini. I really appreciate it. And again, appreciate the support of CHFA for the work that we're doing here to help cross support one another as we advance Connecticut's housing affordability policies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing team at CHFA who's here today to share with you a little bit about the QAP. We'll take some questions at the end. So if Nandini, if you want to stay around, it would be great. We can forward questions to both you and panelists, topics. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let Debbie, Jennifer, and Terry take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Welcome everyone to the session on low-income housing tax credit program and our qualified allocation plan. This is about implementing state policies and priorities. And we are super excited about the vision of the state and CHFA and hope you are too. You're going to see as we go along an opportunity to see how policy is impacting what's in the QAP and potentially learn about how you can impact those policies yourselves as we go forward. If you could potentially, Kylie or Kaylee, share the PowerPoint, that would be wonderful. I am just seeing me. Do you have the PowerPoint on?
I will.
I'll get it up for you, Terry. Give me
Okay,
just
Okay,
one
sorry.
Thank you,
second
Chelsea.
here.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
no
no problem.
All right. Are you seeing it now, Terry?
I see it now. That's perfect. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yep.
Okay, so you could just move on to the next slide if you would. And again, this is about implementing state policies and priorities through the Qualified Allocation Plan. In this program, we'll be talking about just basic policy goals statewide and through CHFA, how they're implemented through the QAP, and how we incorporate our specific policy goals through sustainability and deep income housing through the QAP, and we'll look for your feedback and guidance at the end. Okay, so CHFA's underlying values and foundation of our work includes a renewed customer focus, and you heard from Nandini how important it is to really hear from our customers and their customers on what exactly is needed in the communities. You may have noticed that we've ramped up engagement and outreach so that we can hear more often from you. We're committed to continuous improvement and are open to new ideas and perspectives. So what this means is greater collaboration with our funding partners, and for you, an easier time in accessing funding opportunities and making applications and learning about what will make a successful development application. So a lot of communication is key to partnering with you to further our mission and policy goals. There are three major long-range policy plans related to affordable housing that are embedded in the QAP. The Consolidated Plan for Housing and Community Development and the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice are both authored and produced by the Connecticut Department of Housing. The State Plan of Conservation and Development is authored and produced by the Office of Policy and Management for the state of Connecticut. But first and foremost, we have the CON Plan. The overall goal of the community planning and development programs covered by the CON Plan is to develop decent housing available to all, to ensure living environments and expanded economic opportunities for everyone, but principally for low and moderate income persons. You will see these policies incorporated throughout the QAP. First and foremost, the idea that we must prevent and end homelessness. We're concerned with preservation, with new construction, with supporting economic growth and investments that leverage existing resources. The QAP supports the C&D policy plan's growth management principles. This calls for revitalizing regional centers, expanding housing opportunity and choice, concentrating investments that support both development and transportation. The QAP is also consistent with the C&D policies plan regarding its policy to promote housing mobility and choice across varied infrastructures and preserving existing neighborhoods and housing stock. And the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice is intended to satisfy the state's obligation to analyze blockage to fair housing choice and to take steps to overcome those impediments that are identified. We can then access means to quickly overcome those barriers to create full and equal access to decent, affordable housing in vibrant communities statewide. CHFA's policy priorities further the state's policy goals, driving preservation of existing affordable housing, increasing new units, particularly of deeply affordable housing, supporting income diversity in communities, and ensuring long-term sustainability of the developments that we finance. We can think of the QAP as implementing policy goals through three divisions: application threshold requirements, application classifications, and points categories. Deb's going to talk more about the points. However, they only really apply to the competitive 9% applications. First, an applicant meets basic threshold requirements, self-sorts into one of two classifications, preservation or new construction. And then finally, for the 9% applicants, strives to meet key policy goals, which are incentivized through points for rental affordability and supportive housing, family focus on non-age restricted housing, sustainable design, and deconcentrating poverty. My colleague Debbie Alter will now address the policy implemented through those three divisions of threshold, classifications, and points.
Thanks, Terry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Debbie Alter. I'm CHFA's Senior Program Officer for Program Administration, and I will be describing the way policy is implemented through three areas of the QAP. Excuse me, threshold criteria, which applies to both 4% and 9% competitive applications, as well as application classifications and points incentives, which apply to the 9% round. Many of the threshold requirements are in place to guarantee conformity with the IRS requirements for the LAHT program, as well as to ensure quality applications are submitted. Other threshold criteria are related to policy goals, such as the four that are listed on the slide. The first item in the basic threshold requirements states that the proposed development shall address at least one of 8 named state housing policy goal criteria set forth in the C&D policies plan. These include things like supporting adaptive reuse of historic or other structures, developing appropriate urban infill housing, and promoting affordable housing within walking distance of public transportation facilities. Another threshold requirement states that proposed developments must commit to at least 40 years of affordability, and that at least 20% of the units must serve households with incomes greater than 30% of area median income, but less than or equal to 50% of area median income. All applicants must also commit to make good faith efforts to hire or train very low income persons in accordance with CHFA's very low income construction employment policy. This supports the state's goal of promoting opportunities for residents. And lastly, proposed redevelopment of existing housing must propose a scope of work for the highest number of energy efficiency and sustainable design measures possible to the extent that it is appropriate and practical. And my colleague Jennifer will speak about that later. Okay, the 9% LAHTC program is one of the most important tools in the creation of affordable housing. These tax credits are awarded competitively, and the 2022 application round was oversubscribed by more than 2 to 1. The 9% program has 2 classifications of developments, First is the preservation classification, under which CHFA intends to award 25% of the 9% credits to proposals that revitalize existing and occupied housing. These applications are not scored, but they are evaluated based on a set of criteria outlined in the QAP, which I will talk about in a minute. This supports the state's goal of ensuring access to safe, affordable housing. The second classification is new construction, and CHFA intends to award about 75% of the credits to new developments to support the state's goal of increasing the supply of affordable housing. These applications in the new construction classification are scored, rated, and ranked. So this slide shows the criteria that the preservation classification applications are evaluated on. These are listed in declining order of significance. Greatest need refers to the largest scope of rehabilitation work on a per square foot basis. Connection to community revitalization means developments that are identified by the state, municipality, or another organization as in need of rehabilitation for community revitalization purposes. The next priority is for developments seeking a resyndication of a prior allocation of 9% credits, or those that are at risk of losing affordability due to expiring use restrictions. The next priority is developments located in municipalities that have less than 10% affordable housing. And the last two are the greatest number of sustainable design measures that are proposed and the applicant's demonstrated experience with the LAHTC program. So this slide shows the weight of priorities for the points on the new construction classification. Those applications are scored based on 5 categories, and you can see that the largest number of points incentives are in the rental affordability category, which is in line with the state's priority to expand housing opportunity and choice. So this slide shows the points incentives in the rental affordability category. 6 points are awarded to developments that create at least 20% of their units as supportive housing for residents identified as homeless or chronically homeless, as defined in CHFA's supportive housing guideline. This supports the state's goal of preventing and ending homelessness. There are large point incentives here for serving very low and low income households. 2 points are awarded to developers that commit to an affordability period of at least 50 years, which is above and beyond the threshold requirement of 40 years. And 2 points can be awarded for employing an on-site resident service coordinator that is available to assist all of the residents. The next area is financial efficiency and sustainability, and this category promotes developments that demonstrate cost effectiveness. It encourages efficient use of the scarce 9% credits through the leveraging of different sources of funds, and it incentivizes developments to include energy efficiency measures. Next, we have local impact. This category supports the use of land and resources in ways that enhance the long-term quality of life, which can contribute to a vibrant and resilient economy, and also maximizes existing infrastructure while preserving natural resources. This category gives priority to projects that reuse or capitalize on areas within built-up lands, existing commercial properties, and brownfield sites. Next is the opportunity characteristics category, and this category promotes housing opportunity in municipalities with less than 10% affordable housing, as well as those in areas with defined opportunity characteristics, such as good schools, low poverty rates, and good access to employment. And the last category is qualifications and experience. This promotes experienced development teams with a strong track record in the LAHTC program and affordable housing development. And it also encourages new applicant participants who form a joint venture with an experienced developer. The category also incentivizes participation by women and minorities in the ownership, development, or management of a project, and promotes the use of Connecticut-based general contractors. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Jennifer Landau, who will talk about the technical services aspect of the QAP.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Landau. I lead the team of technical services architects for CHFA, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk more about the QAP related to technical services points. So as Terry and Debbie have mentioned, we do have the two classifications for preservation and new construction. So new construction is defined as anything that's increasing the housing stock. That can be new construction from the ground up, or even gut rehabilitation, which would include adaptive reuse. So if you have a mill building that's vacant and you're adding affordable housing units to that building, that would be considered new construction. And that's against compared against preservation, which is really looking at rehabbing existing and occupied multifamily dwelling units. And these can take, for scope of work can be a minor, a moderate, or a substantial rehab. And that would be, again, considered preservation under those two classifications. Looking at this slide, and you can just go ahead and show the whole slide here. Thank you so much. So looking at new construction, since new construction is the classification that is rated and ranked, as we've discussed, many of these points categories we've seen in prior years. So I'll go through them quickly. Cost effectiveness for hard cost. Again, that's something we've seen in the QAP for many years now. For 1 or 2 points. The 90% or better plans and specifications at 1 point. Again, we've seen that for many years in the QAP. The next section under sustainable design, that was new for last year in the QAP, and it is the same again for this year. I'll be going into more detail in the presentation regarding energy conservation, green building, the renewables, electrification and resiliency, operations and resiliency, as well as sustainable development with digital literacy and connectivity, which is the broadband internet. So there is a total of 13 points available. And again, we've really tried to be very flexible in the QAP. We understand that all projects are very different with unique characteristics. And again, keeping in mind potential budget implications of each. So we really wanted to present a menu of options for these point categories. The last classification is the historic place, adaptive reuse, and brownfield for 3 points. And again, we've seen that again for many years in the QAP, again, related to policy, as Debbie has mentioned. Next slide. So looking a little bit deeper under new construction for energy conservation, again, we have 3 different tiers here noted under energy conservation. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any project specific questions. We'd be happy to go through this. I know there's a lot of information here, so feel free to email me at any point. I'm more than happy to talk to you about specific projects. But under energy conservation, you see we have 3 different tiers and different points awarded for each of those tiers. And again, it's meant to provide more flexibility for developers when they're looking to submit an application and to provide flexibility given your specific project and nuances. Next slide. For green building, again, we have 2 tiers for different points given the level that you and your team feel best suits your project and budget. For example, tier 1 would be LEED Gold, for example, or LEED 2. Tier 2 would be a LEED Platinum, for example, with those different point categories. Under renewables, electrification, and resiliency, this really speaks to your solar array or your PV system, looking at your design, whether it would offset 75% or greater of the annual energy demand would be a tier 1, compared to tier 2, which would be offsetting 90% or greater of your annual energy demand, as well as being an all-electric building and providing the backup power to critical systems. We also have an energy or an additional additive point for all electric buildings, and that would be for 1 point. On the next slide, again, showing operations and resiliency, tier 1 and 2 with owner paid utilities and commissioning. And under tier 2, the one difference would be the backup power to critical systems. And finally, under the sustainable development and digital literacy, we have the high-speed broadband at 1 point. So again, remembering that those were the points and rating and ranking for the new construction category. Under preservation, as Debbie mentioned, these are really evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But looking at preservation, we're really looking to ask teams to submit the most robust plan they can, given their specific scope of work, their budget, with what they can comfortably provide for energy conservation, green building, if solar is an option for your specific project, backup power and high-speed broadband. So again, those are evaluated differently than the new construction category. And again, if anyone has any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to you about your specific projects and any questions you might have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ladies. Really appreciate that. That was a very thorough overview of an organized overview of the QAP, which is not surprising coming from you. I want to go through some questions. If you have them, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I want to start out with a question for Nandini and then come back to our specifics in the QAP. For Nandini, I know I wanted to give you a little bit of a chance to talk about some of the challenges that are happening in the development space, what a sort of challenging environment it is right now just for housing development broadly and affordable housing too in the construction space. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing that developers are having moving existing projects through the pipeline? And what are some of the challenges that you're seeing too with developers trying to put together proposals at this point in time? And what are some of the tools in the toolbox that CHFA has been using to try to support developers through these last few years, and particularly the last year?
That's a very loaded question. I'll try.
Sorry.
You know, I think early on in the pandemic, we started to engage with the development community. You know, when we all went remote very quickly, we started to, through negotiated conversations with partnership, we started having listening sessions with the development community. That was certainly the very beginning. And I only highlight that because I think CHFA has been in a listening mode for the last few years, especially, since the pandemic began. And, we put together some programs quickly to address concerns that owners were having about, fallout as a result of people having to go home, from the pandemic and not having jobs. And so we had, some forbearance programs and things like that. Now, all of that turned out to be actually much less of an issue from an owner perspective. Of course, what has happened as a result of the pandemic is a very disproportionate impact on renters, and it has impacted the communities very differently in terms of how it's impacted people's lives. So we've had rental assistance programs, Unite CT, CHFA is managing and administering My Home CT, which is the home ownership side of this. In terms of the development process itself, I think we're all aware that we're seeing, early in the pandemic, and some of that has kind of shifted. We saw, construction costs going through the roof in various categories. Some of that has abated. We're now seeing, construction costs remaining high in other categories of things, labor shortages. We're seeing certain supply chain issues in certain types of materials and certain types of products that are required for development. So I think from our perspective, we have tried to be more flexible. We are, we've accommodated wherever possible in terms of we have a stored materials policy. We've allowed that on some deals. We've provided flexibility with extensions in terms of interest rates, interest rates through the roof. So we've been able to provide some extensions on rate locks. We've worked with some developers on, they're extremely close to closing, but their rate lock is expiring. How do we get them to the finish line? So we've had to make decisions like that. DOH and CHFA are working really closely to align our processes so that we do not duplicate review. I know that's been a concern in the past. It's something we're going to be looking at, quite honestly, going forward on a more concerted and larger basis in terms of the deals we finance together.
Yeah.
So I think overall we're committed to looking at anything and everything that CHFA requires in terms of our design standards, in terms of our construction standards, and things that make the things that we require, and there are going to be things that we require that are required by statute. But if there are things that we're adding on that add to the cost or the time, we're committed to looking at those closely and adjusting wherever needed so that we can help make development more cost effective and efficient. So I don't have an answer today in terms of the magic bullet, but I think it's going to be a combination of things that make that bring deals together faster and get us to bringing more units online more efficiently.
Thank you. The next question I'll address to the group broadly, and whoever wants to jump in can. So the QAP that you just went through has been in place now for a little over a year. And this is a 2-year QAP now, which is a switch. We can get to that in a moment. But I'm curious to hear what feedback you've been hearing on the new QAP since it's been out, both from developers and others who are part of the development community who you work with. And happy to hear from any of you on that question. But again, curious about what the feedback has been on the new QAP.
I'm happy to start. I think people really appreciate the 2-year. I think it's been like, it's not going to change again for a little bit. So that's been really nice to see that. I think people have appreciated the menu of items that we've now created for energy efficiency and sustainability. I think before it was very limited. And so now people have a choice about how far and deep they want to go and how much, how many points. It's kind of like a menu in a sense of tier 1, 2, and 3. I think we've had some feedback that, people are, there's always feedback about opportunity mapping and how we balance those points in terms of preservation versus new construction. Where do we incentivize building new housing? Where is it actually feasible to build new affordable housing in Connecticut? And how does CHFA look at balancing availability versus opportunities? So I think that is an open question, to be honest with you. I think part of it for us is the QAP is something that the board weighs in on. And so we're going to be looking at that, looking at all of that going forward. But that's the feedback I've heard. I've heard a couple folks talk about, some of the technical items relating to, how we allow for hybrid deals, and some of that has been frustrating to some people. So, we're going to take a concerted look at all of it in the new year.
And if I could piggyback on that, I think a lot of the work that was put into developing the QAP with the concerted outreach and the engagement of all of our partners. The listening that Nandini mentioned earlier really provided an opportunity to have buy-in so that people understood where we were going, understood the policies. And as you can see throughout the QAP, there is embedded the state policies and then further our priorities, most of which have been embraced by the development community. There's always going to be challenges with reaching into opportunity areas because of various difficulties in acquiring properties or development sites, suitability, zoning, those kinds of issues. So we recognize that, and that adds another challenge. So there's been some feedback that says, hey, why don't we provide additional incentives, or why don't we carve out a certain area? So there's lots of different ideas, and we're open to hearing anything from anybody, because I feel like when you're working on something this significant, every voice needs to be heard. When we start to look at the next 2-year QAP, there'll be ample opportunities to kind of flesh out the results we saw and what people are looking forward to seeing ahead. So say we're talking the 24-25 QAP, which actually isn't going to be that far off in the works, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jennifer, Debbie, you want to add to that before we move on?
I agree with everything that's been said. The only other feedback that I've gotten is we do have limits in the QAP on our 9% credits per application, and people don't like that. That's frustrating, especially in an environment like this with rising prices and rising costs. However, we're a small state and we're only allocated a small amount of 9% credits, and we want to do as many deals as possible. So we are incentivizing being creative, and that's not always easy. So that's some of the feedback that I've heard.
Yeah, I think there's some common misperceptions out there about the size and scope of the LIHTC program because of the QAP, and I think because it has such a national profile, I often hear that too, that sort of LIHTC is how we build housing. And in reality, it's really just one component of multiple different state and federal funding streams.
Right.
And I thought it might be helpful if you know off the top of your head to share sort of in a typical year, the number of project applications you receive and the number of projects that are funded. And if you can, the number of units that come out of a typical, and I know typical is hard right now because those per unit costs are going up, but how many units are created by LIHTC in a year, in a given allocation cycle, if you will?
So I can certainly look that up for the number of units, but I can tell you that the last several rounds, we've received about 16 applications, and we've funded anywhere between 7, 8. We did have a larger round where we forward committed into the next year, and I think we did 10. As I look for that number of units.
Yeah, but that gives you a sense too, right? I think, again, 7 to 10 projects is what we're talking about in terms of how many, what the QAP really governs. But
Right.
These projects use a whole host of other financing sources too. I know we have some folks on the call who are developers and very familiar with that, and others who aren't. So I just want to make sure folks understand that too, that when projects are developed through this QAP LIHTC process, that they typically come to the table with a host of other both private and public financing streams attached to them.
The other thing I want to add really quickly, sorry to jump in like that, is
please.
9%, as Debbie said, is one resource, and it tends to be the thing that people fixate on because it really does give you so much subsidy. But if there are ways, and that's something we're kind of looking at, is, there are states out there that are using the 4% credit more effectively to do new unit production. It does require multiple funding sources. It may require looking at the income ranges you're targeting because, depending on what the sort of availability of other funding is, you may have to kind of balance how you, what AMI bands you target and where you can find what funding will address what, how specific funding sources are going to come in with their requirements for where they want the AMI bands to be. But if there's a way to use the 4% more effectively, I'm looking for ideas. If people have ideas, like, we'd love to hear it. I think Pat's listening, and, he and I have been talking a lot about ways we can create more new units. I think preservation is important, but I think ultimately we just need to build more units. And location's important, but it's also important to realize that we're not building enough. And I think, so I think if we can get beyond sort of knowing that the 9% is not the only resource out there, and being a little bit more creative about how we do that, that's going to be our goal.
And I just see that Terry put in the chat that 461 units are built with the 2022 9% program. So that gives you some idea that, yet the state is producing close to 1,000 units generally of affordable housing, give or take, in a given year. So it comprises a big proportion of what's put out there, but not the majority. I want my last question, and if folks have questions, feel free. It doesn't need to be the Kylie hour, but wanted to touch on the opportunity thing, since it's been a big topic of conversation among lots of policymakers and others. We know that for reasons that Nandini talked about, opportunity areas can be harder to develop in. Sometimes it's land acquisition or land acquisition prices. Sometimes it's regulatory hurdles. Sometimes it's community support versus opposition to those projects. And wondering what we can do as advocates, and also what CHFA can do to help support developers who are moving forward projects in those places. We have a presentation later today about one such project and sort of the lengthy path that it took to development. What are some things that we can do to help better support developers and projects and the development of housing in those opportunity areas, in addition to the QAP points?
CHFA has really stepped up our outreach and marketing efforts. And I know it's hard to say, how do you really market, right, when you're doing multifamily? But I think one way we're doing it is through the sharing of research and data that we're really kind of doing a road show. In many cases, we're getting requests from various stakeholder groups and policy groups and others that may even have, even maybe town, municipalities and groups within those municipalities, in terms of they want to understand, what the needs are and how to address the needs in their towns. I think that's the role that CHFA really sees itself in. I think we can be a resource, we can be a convener, we can be, any one of those things, and try to figure out how to showcase the work that we've done in other places for towns that are interested in creating more affordable housing. I think it's going to be hard for us to wade into local politics and tell people what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. I don't think that that's our role necessarily, but we're happy to be in the conversation, in conversations like this, and others like this, to really speak about the value and the value proposition that affordable housing is.
And I think it's also important to kind of reset the narrative on what affordable housing is and what it looks like. I mean, some of our projects are really lovely and beautiful, and you see them all throughout the state. So I think it's also a discussion of this isn't, the affordable housing I think that a lot of people assume it is and what it looks like, but some of the CHFA properties are really something that are beautiful and something to be proud of.
Yeah, I often note that some of the reason for that, I think, is because some of the projects that are being built now look so lovely and are built into the environments in which they are and blend in with those communities that many people don't realize they're affordable housing. So when people think of affordable housing, they're traditionally thinking of, you know, hundreds of units in a big brick structure in an urban environment and don't realize that, you know, down the street or the next town over, they're driving by every day an affordable housing property because it looks like everything else that's being built. In some cases, it's even nicer than I think a lot of what's being built now. So I think you're right, Jennifer. I agree 100% with that. I think about getting those pictures out and changing some perceptions.
Yeah, amen. I think it's the
Terry, jump in,
storytelling.
yeah.
Yep, I just wanted to say it's the storytelling, the changing the narrative, the being able to share data that shows that it is a lot more than what people are expecting. So we have a lot to offer.
Well, thank you to all, especially Nandini, for your remarks this morning and for the CHFA team for your presentation on the QAP. I know you all are always available via email or phone or whatever to answer questions about the QAP and the development process. And thank you for that. So folks, feel free to reach out to the folks you've heard this morning. And thank you again for your time. I hope you're all able to join some of the rest of the sessions that we have teed up for this afternoon. Thanks again, everyone. We will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
so much.
Take care.